All right, Junk, do you want to start us off this evening or do you want me to?
No, you take the helm.
All righty, guys. So, a lot of us know what the Vatican is. A lot of us don't know what the Vatican is. First of all, what the hell is the Vatican and where is its location? Well, currently, and for the last, I don't know, let's say 1,000, maybe 1,200 years or so. I mean, it's been a long time. It's how long? How old is this building? Because I don't actually know. It's so old, I don't even know. Because if you get into the underground of it, I mean, it could be, like I said, 1,200 years old. The top portion of it is most definitely roughly between 800 to 600 years old. But everything below it, it has to be much older because, when you start going into what is actually down there, it predates, pretty much most of our modern history. So it's crazy. Junk, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, so basically, as you were kind of alluding, the actual building itself was built atop quote unquote St. Peter's grave. So that that alone is an ancient site. And you've seen kind of like a more modern-esque feel, which is pretty fascinating because especially when we talked about everything with Tartaria, you can almost see that reflected in the architecture itself. So I would say, just for starters, to answer your question, the Vatican is basically, it's located in Rome, and it's at the very center of Rome. It's basically the smallest state in Europe, and
City.
it has, yeah, it's basically an independent city state, and it's um, actually, interestingly enough, considered its own country.
Yep.
So that's where things start to take a power hold if you think about that for a little too long.
Just
But
like
yeah, go for it.
just like Washington D.C. and just like London.
Exactly. It's basically encircled by like a 2 mile border with Italy, and I think it covers around 100 acres. So it's basically like a fraction of the of New York Central Park. So it's very very tiny. It's a complex, as you alluded in your questions, but it's absolutely fascinating because I was doing some research on the population within the Vatican, of which we're going to get into in a moment. But we're talking about 500 residents. So just put that in perspective when you talk about maybe Los Angeles in the millions. This is 500, so you can just kind of get the size and scale of what this is. But it's tucked in the heart of Rome, so it's in Italy.
So I just read up on how old that building is in the Vatican. There was an older version of it called Old St. Peter's Basilica, and that was built in the fourth century. But then the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great started construction on the present basilica, which I guess is what we see here. I don't know how much of it they changed, but that started in 1500, and it took about 120 years to finish.
Okay, so started in roughly 1,500.
The new one, the older one that was there before was in the year 400.
Right, I know, and
Yeah.
I'm going by the new one. Because as far as the old one, we're talking about 4th century. That's 300. That's year 300. That's history that is so lost that we have no real concept of. So, I mean, like I said, the building, even, before that could be older. So who knows? Who really knows how old this, area is to our human race? But it's looking at this, took 150 years to build after 1500, roughly 1500, so 1650, 1640, something like that. Yeah, roughly 600 years. No, 400 years. Yeah, 400 years. We are not at 2200 yet.
I wish.
No, you don't. No, you do not.
No.
Well, actually, yes, you do. Yes, you do. Yeah, you do. That's going to be a fun time. But moving on. So that's how big the main complex is. It's the actual city state is much larger. It has multiple areas. There's even hospitals, there's universities. Like the actual Vatican city state is massive, but the complex itself is relatively small. Thinking about it in the grand scheme of things, it's relatively small. And the main border of the complex, as you can see, is kind of where the ring arch starts. Anything before that, that's kind of outside of the complex. And if you kind of look at its structure from this angle, and I kind of appreciate it, it's almost megalithic in nature, if you really think about it. It's not as perfect in some of the geometric shapes as some of the megalithic structures, but getting rid of some of the ridges as modern humans have built stuff and kind of more or less flattening them out, you can very much see kind of like an ancient complex here and kind of understand where its roots originally began and where it's at now. But that's just my
Can I make a point really quick in that
Go.
As a country, a city-state itself, you have to realize that Italy is of no consolation because they do everything within these walls. They basically mint their own euros. They print stamps, issue passports, license plates. They have their own flag, of which you'll see later on. And it's just basically an entire world consolidated into a hyper religious foundation. And we talk about this. It's going to be extensive, as you'll see in a minute.
So this is a full map view of the Vatican City. I actually was able to have the privilege of meeting somebody who was born in the Vatican City, and he was born roughly, I think, 2 blocks away from the actual main building itself. So it's really fascinating. But really looking at this, you kind of get you get the scale of everything. You get the scale of really how massive this complex is. And if you look, it's got stars on each side. And I don't want to say that that's us. I want to say that that was there before. Now, granted, like I said, it's not perfect because people have built around it. People have built homes, people have built houses, but its basic geometric shape is still there, and it's not anything that we have built recently.
Now, also, while you're looking at this map, it's also important to realize that it's not just about width. There's some depth to this complex. We talk about secret tunnels, some catacombs. So this thing is a multi-layered city. So it's not all what it appears to be on the surface, and it starts to take on a darker hue when you peek down the alleys. So just something to think about.
So why is there so much history surrounding this vast and safeguarded complex? So one of the big things that we must understand is that it has its roots based in Satanism. And now I don't know much about Catholicism. I was raised mainly Protestant, which, as we know, is the offshoot by Martin Luther, which tried to make a more in-line version of, religion towards, as they would as their version of God, but it's essentially still a lot of the same values from Catholicism. And we all know, if we've done our basic, history, that Martin Luther, although was not approved by the Vatican, he wouldn't have been doing what he was doing if he did not get the thumbs up of, hey, you do that. So this is where I kind of have to put my hands up and say I don't know much about. So, Junk, I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
Do
Or
you mind
Xenox,
if I
take it away.
real quick?
Take it away, my brother.
So I just want to add a little bit. This kind of segues in between the two topics. You have a lot of Catholic symbolism and a lot of satanic symbolism. I haven't done a depth of research. A Junk might know more about the satanic symbolism, but throughout the city, you'll see things like, if you guys have heard of the pine cone, you'll see that in a whole bunch of different cultures, even Egypt. And the pine cone symbolizes the third eye and enlightenment. And if you watched our chakra episode, you'd understand a bit of the connection to the soul. And then you have other statues, such as the statue of St. Peter, where it depicts Peter in the exact same pose as you see as Jesus right there, with the two fingers, and his hand resting by his heart. But in that one, I think he's holding a cross or some sort of device.
He's not.
So, sorry, what?
He's not.
Not a cross.
No, he's just kind of holding his heart center.
Oh, okay. Yes. So there's a lot of good symbolism, and then there's a lot of bad symbolism. So we're gonna dissect a little bit of that there. Junk, you can take it away.
So this is where the great confusion stems from, in that you have to realize, and again, we're not trying to attack or judge anybody in this chat room or anybody watching the replay, but religion itself, at its very fundamental core, is a controlling mechanism. It is something that monetizes fear and creates a almost Stockholm syndrome effect in those who have been indoctrinated. Now, the reason this is the way it is because there's been such mystery shrouding our awareness about what the afterlife is, what life is in general, and what people have done, or shall I say dark forces, because it's hard to call these things people, but they have utilized this modality of creating and corralling the collective into a shared space so that they can teach them, tell them exactly what to think, what not to think, all while keeping that level of egoic prestige within their own honor. So when we talk about Catholicism versus Satanism, you see shared elements, and that's of no coincidence. As you're seeing here, these are all popes from the past. And while the symbolism is varying and different, you have to start to see the overlay. Primarily with Catholicism, a lot of it kind of falls in line with worshiping an idol or some figure that is above you, right? Because you're meant to bow down and obey. And so what you see within the Vatican, especially with popes, is that they're bowing to some of these figures. And, I would not be surprised, and Scooby, you could probably back me on this, that they probably have a ball statue somewhere in the basement that they just go to time. But from this point, you have to see on the surface how they're revealing their true belief system, their true intention, right in plain view. And so I started looking into this, and I started diving deeper and deeper. Just as Xenox said, the symbolism is running rampant. You're going to see it in a lot of things, and there's a few slides coming up where the architecture is quite literally depicting what they believe. But for now, I just want you to look at hand signals. I want you to look at how they hold themselves in public spaces, how they acknowledge and honor these figures, like a crucified Christ or the Mother Mary, etc. All of these beings, all of these quote unquote ascended masters in an essence have been contorted to demigod status. And what they've done is they've intertwined Catholicism and Satanism into one and the same. And, it takes consciousness to break the mold and see what's really going on. But those with eyes
I
to
have
see
a
clearly.
good example for you there. If,
Yeah.
So a perfect example. I love how you made that. That the negative forces of the Satanists, or however you want to say it, they really have. This is their method. They like to co-opt and corrupt things, and you'll see that in even scriptures in the Bible is that it talks about how the devil, blah blah blah, likes to turn things kind of upside down, and so to speak. And so one perfect example are these photos. And so the meaning of that hand symbol basically means to that we are saved and to receive blessings in the name of Jesus. Um, but the Catholic Church has adopted that symbol and actually used a specific script from the Bible uh, that is actually very I don't know how to put it, but it goes with what you were saying, how it is a symbol of power over others. And so the verse is, at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, of things in heaven and things of earth and things under the earth. And so that is, I guess, it depends how you interpret that verse. It could be good or bad. But to them, I really feel like that is a symbol of power that they're using over others. A more obvious example, uh, instead of getting into the deep symbolism of hand gestures, because that can be very subjective, have you ever seen the photo of the church within the Vatican where it's shaped like the head of a python
That's
or a
that's
snake?
that's later on, bud.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting into too much stuff. But
No,
yeah,
you're good.
so those are two examples.
So this one, I have my own little things about this because, as you see the child is moving their hand down and then making the cross, I always understood is that you were going up to your head, then the cross, versus head down and then the cross, and then you pray. This one I've always been a little construed about because it could either be both ways. It can be interpreted both ways. Hope you were going to say something.
Yeah, if I can add something, I've noticed that the American Catholics do the forehead to the sternum and then across the chest, but it appears as though those in Russia, they do what you were talking about, Scuba, where they go to the side and then down.
Yeah. I don't know. It's very weird.
Well, I don't know if it has anything to do with the Catholic Church per se versus the Roman Catholic Church, if there's a bit of difference in that symbol.
Oh, there is a huge difference. There's the Russian Orthodox Church, which is completely separate from the Vatican, and it's a very big um I guess controversy, or they're in that realm if you get into like Christians and stuff. So they're known to have their own whole rich history and traditions that are very different. So you could do a whole nother episode on that. Actually, it's a lot.
Yeah. They're also going into a lot of religion that's been lost to the Russian people. So this is a massive list to just give you a perspective of how many popes there have been all throughout history. And it's a little alarming, really sitting down and, taking all of this in and realizing, holy crap, all throughout the ages, there have been a guy basically saying that I have connection to Jesus and I could show you the way.
Hey, Scuba, I have a question.
Go for it.
So someone said at some point there was like the last good pope, so to speak. Do you have enough knowledge, or you could probably say a general area where the the popehood or the Vatican was completely co-opted, or you think it's been like that since its inception?
Been like that since its inception, because from the earliest popes, you can just pay attention, and I've been wanting to say this all night. You can just pay attention to the headdress.
Yeah.
As soon as you see the fish head headdress, it's done. They are co-opted. They are part of it. They are in on it. They don't care about us. They are in on harvesting our energy, and they don't care. If they wear the headdress and they basically play the part, they are in on it. There is no good pope. I mean, there could be a less, less focused, less, a more spiritually aligned pope, but at the end of the day, he won't go past a certain density because he partaked in those matters, because you cannot be at that high prestige without at least touching a child.
Well, wait, Scuba, isn't the selection for a pope like extremely extensive?
Yes.
It goes on maybe for I don't know if anybody can correct me. I don't know the selection process, but I know that I think it's like a unanimous vote.
Yes.
Jeez.
It is.
And
It's
there's
not
a whole
easy to
ritual
become the
behind
pope.
it.
It's not an easy thing to become the pope, but it's fascinating how, a group of unanimously voted high prestigious cardinals say this cardinal or this person has now become the pope. They have connection to God, not because of action, not because of pure spiritual connection, but because we agreed upon it.
Also, I have a date for that graphic you're looking off to the right. I had to cut off a row, but that basically stems. These are all the supreme pontiffs from Rome from 33 AD to the present day.
Wow.
So extremely extensive. And then, yeah, again, right at the middle, you see all of the popes on the list. I mean, that's a monument in the Vatican itself.
So, what religion dominates the Vatican and how does it influence the world? So, of course, we know Catholicism, and this is just to show you how extensive they have reached their little tentacles inside of our society. Roughly 75 million people in the United States, 96 million people in Mexico, 134 million people in Brazil, and just the list goes on and on. And it's, really seeing this, it's kind of like, holy fuck, this is an infested parasite.
Might I just say that the most heavily concentrated places of this belief are also the ones that are most susceptible to influence? So I'm just going to put that out there.
I also want to make note that most of these highly concentrated areas that aren't Europe have been conquered by conquistadors. Just gonna want to throw that out there. The Spanish were very zealous in spreading Catholicism across the African areas. So yeah, are there any comments, questions, or concerns on this one? Because this one is just kind of giving you guys a perspective.
Did anybody in the chat right here? Did anybody grow up Catholic? I want to share their experiences really quick.
I grew up Catholic.
Talk about it.
I don't know. It's not much to add, but so my parents weren't like super Catholic. They just tried to take me to church like once a week, if that. But I went to a Catholic private school for elementary and middle school, and so they had church in school, probably, you know, every couple of weeks. They didn't really force a whole lot of stuff on us. You know, they obviously made us go to mass, but we weren't like highly conscripted. We did have a religious class. It wasn't too strict. I hated the teachers more than the Catholicism. It wasn't
Now,
that bad. It was.
did you ever participate in communion?
Yes, I did.
What's your perspective on it since you've done it firsthand?
So I honestly am neutral about it. What I think it is, I think it's a good, I guess how you say, ritual for people who are unaware, so they can understand parts about how spiritual practices work and occultism and all that kind of stuff. But when you get deeper into it, that's when you kind of have to take a step back and realize the symbolism behind a lot of it.
Oh yeah, you're eating somebody's flesh and drinking his blood.
And so that's when it's like, oh yeah, oh gosh, okay, yeah. It's probably not what was intended when Jesus said all of that. But they did have things like gosh, there was another, it started with a C. It wasn't communion. It happens when you're older.
Confession?
No, not confession. We did have those. That was kind of awkward. Because I always
Forgive me,
felt like I was gonna
Father,
be punished.
for I have sinned.
Yes. Oh yeah. So that was another thing. This goes for Catholicism in general, is that you always have this expectation that you're a sinner, you're dirty, and you're just bound for punishment no matter what you do, because that's how you are. And I feel like that's something that's been very present for a long time, actually. And it's been that is what the one control tool that I did see. But it was nothing that I experienced was like heavy. They did have like anointing with oils and stuff, which was better than the other rituals, but yeah, nothing. Oh, the so like when they repeat like certain scripts from the Bible, I felt like they're doing it as like a drone versus like if you were to take the actual spirituality, you were supposed to do that with your heart, your emotions, and all that kind of stuff. So the humanity is kind of taken out of the whole spiritual practice. It's very, you know, you're just there, and then you pay your money to the church, and you're forgiven of your sins, and you can go live life like a normal person again. But that was my experience. Scuba, I want to drop a really cool photo for you in the chat there. It's going to be of the Pope's hat, and then a side-by-side picture of the Dagon god, the Anunnaki, that was depicted.
In the meanwhile, I do want to make a point that from this widespread influence of Catholicism, it all leads back to the Vatican because, just as Scuba said earlier, there is so much trust and faith in a single person being the middleman for a connection with God. And as we've known, that has been nothing more than ego and indirect polarization. So it's fascinating to think that this is like the Super Bowl for Catholics to go to the Vatican. And we're going to get into that, but it all kind of leads to a head of a massive consolidation of belief in one specific space, including the servants of the Vatican, which, as you see off to the left, are the Swiss Guard, and off to the right, as Scuba mentioned, the Cardinals.
And I also want to make note that for the last 400 years, they haven't changed their garb. I mean, they've made small tweaks here and there, but for the most part, it's been generally the same colors, the same general feel, the same, dreary Roman look. It's really quite fascinating that, they've been really able to preserve their history in such a realistic way, not so much just kind of encasing it, but they're living by it type of way.
And I will say the Swiss Guard basically is a mercenary force. So these aren't Italians. These are Swiss citizens. And they're actually marksmen. So basically their whole objective and job is to protect the Pope by any cost. And they failed. If you know anything about the history of the Vatican, of a Pope being shot in daylight, and all of these things of the sort. But you're basically looking at the army of the Vatican. All of these guys know exactly how to kill. I'm sure they've killed before. And the worst part is that they're young. They're kids. They are not 40 plus years old. They are kids dressed up in these Renaissance uniforms. So it's really heartbreaking to see, because you know that this is the peak level of indoctrination. That if you are asked, for example, to join the force and you accept, and once you're in, one of these popes or one of these cardinals asks you to do something despicable, you're going to do it with a smile on your face. And we'll get into that dark side of the Vatican very soon.
So as you can see, this one person is just able to get a whole crowd. You know, we dream of something like a crowd like this just gathered around one cause in America, and you just see it in Europe for something like this. And I'm sorry, but it just can't help but churn my stomach and make me sick.
I have one word. Loosh.
Yep. Yeah, bingo. And bingo was his name. Oh. All right.
What was
But
the
yeah,
word?
but yeah.
Oh, no, go for it.
Go
I'm
for it.
sorry. Max, what was the word?
Loosh.
Oh, I'm glad you asked. Do you want to give a definition of loosh?
Basically, the I don't want to say the harmonization because that's not a word. The consolidation of your
Siphoning.
or siphoning the consolidation of siphoning your fear energy. So you being curled up into a ball, crying your eyes out, fearing for your life, they feed on that. They want that.
And not
You
only
being
that. Sorry, you go ahead.
you being so afraid of you going to hell, they feed on that.
And speaking of energy, if you guys can look in the foreground, you'll actually see a giant pillar. This isn't a random pillar. This is an obelisk from Egypt, of which they stole from Heliopolis, which I personally visited. And you see right in front of the temple in Egypt a very odd asymmetrical complex, because they stole one of the energy transceivers. So they basically took this. I forgot how they transported it, but it's basically an obelisk made out of a single piece of red granite, and these things weigh more than like 350 tons. So basically stole it, put it right in the center, and it's not just because they wanted cool decoration. If you know anything about obelisks, these things actually receive atmospheric energy and create free energy within the complex. So that could even be consolidating, just as Scuba and Xenox were mentioning, the harnessing of that energy from these crowds, because it's not, and I know when you look out, you see a bunch of little dots. That crowd does not stop within the courtyard. That goes on all the way back, and it just keeps going and going. And this isn't even talking about the televisation of these broadcasts, because the Pope has to address them frequently. And yeah, this is too much power. You know what I mean? This is disgusting power, because I know everybody, or at least a majority of people in that crowd, would lay down their life for somebody they don't even know, for nothing more than the faith cause of belief. So it's pretty disturbing. Yeah.
And now we go into the dark part of their societal influence. They cannot, I repeat, cannot have as much fucking influence as they do without adrenochrome. It's not possible. There's no fucking way. No. There's no other way they would be able to have that much power and or ability without adrenochrome and their hand in the child trafficking trade and the total and complete siphoning and consolidation, as we said again, of the child and innocent child innocence of that specific being. And it sucks. It's sad. It makes me almost brings me to tears every single time because it just, I can't help but imagine a old white man abusing a child that doesn't know what's going on. And unfortunately, we have to assume that it's as bad as what we've heard of Hillary Clinton. It's just not talked about.
So this is something I dove into as of recent, and I don't always watch Netflix, but when I do, it's really good documentaries. And there's this documentary called The Vatican Girl. And basically, it centers upon the disappearance of this young 15-year-old girl named Emanuelle Orlandi. And she was basically a Vatican girl. So remember how at the very beginning of this this episode, we talked about how the Vatican has around 500 to 800 citizens. And that's on a good day. Some of them are actually maybe around 300, 400. Well, the Vatican has been basically abducting, molesting, and quite frankly, a lot of Italian boys and girls. And so what happened with this documentary, it's called Vatican Girl on Netflix. I highly recommend you do it. It'll give you a they basically abducted this one girl, and it was all because a cardinal, while she was in the courtyard just between her music, thought that she was sexually attractive and started to put out the word, because they're all in this together. You have to, just as Scuba said, the unanimous vote of a pope. Those are basically all, it's like one big family with a segmented family within it. So the more corrupt you are, the more rank you are. And so what happened was this girl was targeted by the Pope's right-hand man. So he gets what he wants. And basically one of these days they abducted her, and it would have gone under the radar if she wasn't of the Vatican, but she does. And so they did this throughout the
Junk, you're cutting out hard. You were going so well there, but you started cutting out bad.
Sorry, am I back?
Yep.
Sorry, I forget where I was, but spoiler to say so we can only assume and guess what happens with this temple-like complex. It's freaky, but it's also extremely disturbing because they're corrupting the most innocent members of society, which are children who can't fight back, children who have no morality yet, and for what reason? It's all self-service, just as Enoch said. It's the polarization of self-service, and that's why they'll go to such feats and such lengths to get their fantasy, but also cover the tracks. So it's pretty disturbing. And then actually, years later, they found bones in the basement of the Vatican, human bones, and not just a few, a lot of human bones.
So this one was more or less a question for Dylan. We'll ask him when he comes back. What are some of the publicly known and unknown things hidden within and beneath the complex? So this one is kind of more or less going to go into the symbolism, and then we'll kind of go into what's down below. So if you're looking at this shape right here, you can kind of, I mean, from what I see, I would see a focal point of energy, shooting outwards. It's kind of focused in the center and then travels along the way. I mean, if I were to be a little space agey, it kind of looks like a barrel of a very large cannon, if you really want my honest opinion. I mean, I know it's a city block, but just looking at it from a zoomed out visual standpoint, it really does look like a massive cannon of some sort, and it almost echoes that if you have all of these guys just standing there looking in the direction of the way that it's firing. That's not a coincidence.
I don't know if you guys can hear me. My computer's glitching out, but I will say it also resembles a keyhole.
Yeah, that too.
Let that sink in.
Yeah, it does. Very interesting. Xenox, you want to talk about this one? You started going into it.
Oh, I mean, I just know the surface level stuff, but as you can see, if you have a bit of imagination, you can see it's the head of a snake. So you have the two eyes, the scales on the forehead, and then the teeth down the middle there. And trust me, they do this architecture very purposeful. It's not just a coincidence. And actually, I think you see the same thing similarly. It looks like the head of a snake if you were to go on the outside of it. I think I've seen a aerial picture of that. But yeah, they're just putting it in your face here.
Now, this, I don't know what this is. This is just extremely ominous. I've always thought this was ominous. I've seen this on Instagram. I've seen this on multiple YouTube channels. I don't remember exactly what this is depicting, but this is, nonetheless fucking spooky. That's supposed to be in a place talking about God.
I can try and look it up. Do you know where it's at or what it's called?
Nope.
Well, yeah, it's in the same complex as it's called the P.1 Audience Hall. So just as you saw before, it's shaped like a serpent, but within the teeth is where the Pope sits, within the mouth of the snake. And what does that tell you? Jeez, their symbolism goes deep. But my interpretation of this is that these are quote unquote demons or negative entities consuming Jesus, not Jesus escaping the demons. It looks like he's falling into them, because if you're descending, your hands would be up. But if you're ascending, your hands would be down. That's just how I'm getting the motion of it.
Okay.
Dude, what the fuck? I'm looking at this thing up close. Hold on, I gotta put this picture in here. This is 10 times worse than the one you put up.
Yeah, that's wicked. Here, let me add this.
You don't even have to dissect this one. Just fucking look at it.
Almost looks alien.
Yeah.
Well, no, wait, that's it. That's inverted. Or is that seriously what it looks like?
Yeah, up close. That's the if you go to the other one, that's the thing that's up front. That's up
Are you sure
high.
that's not inverted? No, I think it's inverted because the hair goes off to the right.
Or they changed
Wait, no, look
it.
at that. That's the ceiling. You see the ceiling up there?
No. Wait, go Scuba. Go back to the other picture. Look, no, yeah. Look at his head. You see the hair going off to the right?
Well, yeah, that's behind him though.
Yeah, that's behind him.
Either way, geez, that is not something that looks like Jesus.
No.
Basically, they talk about the Papal Audience Hall being a Wednesday based ceremony where the Pope comes in and gives people time to see the Pope and receive the blessing, the apostolic blessing from the Pope. Weird.
And this is what I was mentioning earlier about the fish heads with the Sumerian god Dagon, or the fish god. Dylan did a very, very good deep dive into Dagon for the new Templars channel. I highly recommend looking at it. And you will come to find out that Mr. Dagon is not the greatest gods that we should be worshipping out of the Sumerian ones.
Hey, Scuba, I'm sending you another fun little picture I didn't send you before, but check this one out.
Is this with symbolism or with
Yep.
Okay.
Pretty blatantly obvious too.
Oh my, yeah. Needs to load. There it goes. Look at that.
Oh yeah.
They're embroidered, so you don't just make a mistake.
Wait, let's back up. Do you guys know what symbol that is?
So this is the
Anyone in the audience?
symbol for.
Okay, you go ahead, Scuba.
This is the known FBI symbol for boy lover that pedophiles use for their symbolism to try and attract and let their clan know that they like little boys. The circle in a spiral is girl lover. So, as you can see, the Pope and the Vatican prefer little boys. What happened to the Library of Alexandria, and how does it pertain to the Vatican? So this goes into one of my favorite topics of ancient history, and that is what the Library of Alexandria was. And what this place was supposed to be was a full library of knowledge from civilizations long gone, talking about times before the moon, talking about, different eras across the whole planet, Atlantis, Lemuria, all of the different worlds. I'm sure it talked about Hollow Earth. I'm sure it talked about ancient ancestors and the Anunnaki very in depth. I'm sure it talked about the Mayans, or it had books on the Mayans. And the most spectacular thing about the Library of Alexandria was its way of entry. You didn't have a library card. You didn't have to pay to get in there. The only way that you were accepted in is if you were able to provide a new set of knowledge in any area, whether it be agriculture, science, medicine, literature, language, history, anything. Any type of new information that you could provide, you could have access to anything. And it was supposedly one of the most beautiful buildings ever created by man. And unfortunately, one night, it was burned to the ground. Absolutely and utterly demolished. Completely destroyed. Now, it is to be believed that most, if not all, of the books that resided inside of the Library of Alexandria were then taken to the Vatican, or then St. Petersburg Bastilia. And it's really fascinating if that's the case, because we're literally talking about a treasure trove of not just thousands of years, not just tens of thousands of years, but possibly hundreds of thousands of years of written history, just locked away in many layers and levels of underground complex. It's fascinating, it's scary, and it's disgusting. And, a part of me wants to believe that all of that burned down in the fire. As tragic as that sounds, I would much rather it be lost and into the Akashic records than hidden away physically in the Vatican archive, where it may never be seen again.
Excuse me, but I thought they already found all those books.
No, there's no way they were able to find every single book from the Library of Alexandria. There was so much knowledge kept away inside that place that anybody really had access to, that there's no way.
We're talking at least 1 million or more scrolls, and
right.
They did have some information that cross translation, but you have to think about the Library of Alexandria the burning itself. It was either pillaged. I mean, you can't just sit down and transcribe everything while the city's on fire. So we're thinking about where it was stashed, who had the awareness and knowledge of what holding information from society would do, because it really set back civilization roughly like 1,000 years. We went right back to scratch. They wiped the slate clean. And that's why I believe, especially if you follow the breadcrumbs and see how the Vatican uses sacred geometry or obelisks. Why do you think they went to go steal an obelisk? They know exactly what they're doing. So,
hey, Xenox, hope before you speak, I have a quick thing that I want Xenox to do. Xenox, can you do a quick Google search for me? Can you see how many years either before or after the Tower of Babel fell and the Library of Alexandria burned down? Thank you.
So let me reiterate the question here. So when did the Tower of Babel fall, and when did
the Library of Alexandria burned down? Because if they were in the very same time frame, at least within 100 years of each other, that's not a coincidence. I just want to throw that out there.
Yes.
Hope you were going to say something.
Well, I want to say something really fast. It was Julius Caesar that basically orchestrated the Library of Alexandria. So, does anybody know the religious orientation of Julius Caesar?
No.
There you go.
I do not know the religion Julius Caesar was a part of. Was it Catholicism?
Wow. Well, hold on. I did not find a date, but in Mexico, an angered god of the heavens called upon the inhabitants of the sky, who destroyed the tower and scattered its inhabitants. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
That's interesting. Hold on. I'm still looking for the date.
No, you're fine.
Oh yeah, here's another excerpt. The Great Spirit destroyed it with thunderbolts. I'm sorry. I just wanted to put those out there because that's really interesting. You go ahead.
So there wasn't any Christianity or Islam during the period of Julius Caesar, so they were following paganism.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's fascinating. So moving on, what is the Smithsonian and why does it matter to the Vatican? So us Americans, we generally know what the Smithsonian is. If you don't, quick little history of it. It is basically the American Institute for our modern history. It is the premier museum for America. You know, you go there, you see the first flying machine, you see this, you see that. You see history from literally most of America. I don't know if pieces of Titanic are in there. That'd be interesting if it was. But for the most part, yeah, it is our American, astute museum per se. Why does it matter with the Vatican? Well, it is my belief that the Smithsonian is basically the American version of the Vatican, which I mean in terms of not religion, but quote unquote, as they like to say, preservation of knowledge, meaning what is under each building will shock you. What's under the Smithsonian will make your jaw drop because, it's where they've kept the American giants. It's where they've kept, traces, elements of Tartaria from American area, from old American areas. There is probably so many artifacts from the Grand Canyon down there. It's probably ridiculous considering most archaeologists can't go there or don't want to go there for some reason, even though that it is the one area in the United States that hasn't been explored from, every fucking archaeologist known to man. I don't know why nobody's gone there. Also makes you question why nobody's gone there, because they probably already have, and they have everything in the basement because they don't want to talk about it. I also want to make note that, there have been reports, very old reports from like early 1900 of, remnants of older civilizations that aren't even talked about in our history books that, had Native American ties. The Native Americans weren't just tribesmen. They had, big ancient roots. And, the problem is that we had such an industrialization in the United States that we kind of just built on everything. We didn't really care. We just kind of built and built and built and built and mined and built and built and mined. So, we didn't really care about the land. We pillaged and built our own shit. And it sucks because, there wasn't a lot of attention on the preservation of history. It was just more or less kind of store it somewhere for later. But unfortunately, that store it somewhere for later got a little too cocky with how much it got. And it's like, you can't see this. We don't want you to see this. You're not allowed to see this. We'll show you this, but we don't want to show you this.
It's like they dictate the narrative of human history. They only allow what they want you to think to come out, and then everything else is kind of like a remembrance. So it's fascinating to think that they hold, unquote, skeletons in the closet, but more so, where is the partnership between the two organizations?
Yeah,
Scuba.
That's a good question. What?
Yeah, you got about a 4,000 gap period in between the Babel.
All right, that's perfectly fine. I still wanted to know. I personally didn't. It could have been 4,000 years. It could have been 1,000 years. It could have been 100 years. I didn't. I was genuinely curious because from what I understand, the Library of Alexandria burned down a long time ago. Like the fact that Julius Caesar had a hand in it, that's news to me. I always understood that it was, it burned down and like like early 1200s.
It says 48 BC.
Oh wow. Okay. So yeah, even older than I thought. So yeah, that's older than the original construction of the Vatican.
Well, yeah, because it was before Christ.
But even the original building, though. You said the original building was built in year 400.
But the
That
Catholic,
was the St. Peter's Basilica.
Right. That's what I'm saying. And the Library of Alexandria burned down in 48.
Yeah.
So that's even so. Even so, where did they store it all? They had to store it for 400
Probably
years,
in St. Peter's Basilica.
but it wasn't built yet.
Oh, I'm sure they had something rudimentary.
Probably.
It just wasn't fancy.
How far away was Library of Alexandria to the Vatican or the St. Petersburg Bastille?
I looked that up.
Going into the nitty-gritty of it all. So yeah, you just got to imagine just hallways of shelves going on for ever. And there are
50
many,
miles.
many
50 miles.
50 miles.
Yeah, it's right by Egypt. I think
What
it's in
is?
Egypt. The ancient Alexandria. Unless ancient Alexandria is something different.
Yeah, that's something different.
Okay. Library of Alexandria.
You know what's interesting about the Vatican archives, though, is that while they remained a mystery and a quote-unquote conspiracy theory for years, the Vatican snitched themselves out. They basically called it Vatican Archives, or I forget how they named it, but basically bringing it to light that they did have an archive, and they did, in fact, open the archive, but browsing is explicitly prohibited. The only being, shall I say, the only person that could browse these texts are the Pope. That's it. And you think about, well, Jesus, if the Pope is corrupted, then none of this information is going to get out. So I had the proposal that while everybody else was storming Area 51, that we just all gather together and we storm the Vatican archives and get our human history back once and for all.
Amen to that. So that is essentially part 1. We kind of talked about this a little bit in depth. We're definitely going to go more into the deeper parts of the symbolism in the next part. We touched on it. We kind of gave you a visual, but now we want to tell you what it all means and, what their agenda overall is and why they are able and why they continue to perpetuate their agenda when, to a degree, they know they're failing.